had taken.
You have the Times Events reel able to say this. That's the narrative. It was written. This is the perfect screenplay.
Jump in here and tell you that's a lie. What we know happens thereafter is Charlie concludes this call with Josh and the rabbi, and then he sends off text messages to his security chief, Dan Flood.
Charlie Kirk's mother is finally stepping forward, and according to growing online discussions, her reaction is changing how many people are looking at the entire story. For weeks, Erika's version of Charlie's final days dominated headlines and interviews. But now a different narrative is starting to emerge, and supporters on both sides are fighting over which version feels more believable. What started as quiet background chatter has turned into a much louder public debate. Old interviews are being revisited, timelines are being compared side by side.
People know that Charlie sensed that he was going to die tomorrow is an absolute fact. Why these individuals are all being quiet about that is a massive question.
And every resurfaced detail seems to create even more questions instead of answers. That's when everything started to shift. Erika had already faced criticism after repeatedly claiming Charlie had serious concerns about his safety in the weeks leading up to his death. But now some online commentators believe the way she tells the story has gradually changed over time. Critics argue the focus no longer sounds centered on Charlie himself, but increasingly on Erika's role in trying to protect him behind the scenes. And according to public reactions online, that contrast has become impossible for some people to ignore.
There were people out there that hated us with deep, deep passion of hate, but it didn't scare us. Never, he was never afraid of that. Neither was I. Obviously, we protect our children. You know, we don't show their faces on the internet.
Because the more interviews people revisit, the more they feel the emotional framing around Charlie's final days keeps evolving. Whether that's simply the result of grief, stress, or something else remains unclear. But the growing inconsistency is exactly why scrutiny around the story has intensified so quickly. And this is where the situation gets even more complicated. New speculation online has centered around a private dinner Erika reportedly arranged on Charlie's final night.
That was our last day. It was our last day. Like, we always lived as if it was the last day. That's why Charlie's speeches were so good. But again, it wasn't anything that, you would think any.
According to public discussion, the gathering allegedly included a Zoom call involving a rabbi based in Israel, during which Charlie was reportedly encouraged to reconsider certain public positions he had taken. None of those claims have been officially confirmed. Still, the timing of the reported conversation immediately caught attention online. Because for many observers, that detail changed the entire atmosphere surrounding the story. Suddenly, social media users started asking the same questions over and over again. Why was that conversation happening that night? Why were political and religious figures allegedly involved behind closed doors? And why did these details only begin surfacing much later?
And Charlie heard about these curses, and that news genuinely rattled Erika in particular. She knew Christian teaching on the subject. She loved Charlie, absolutely. And she was scared when she heard of the curses Jezebel had called up.
To some online critics, the evening no longer sounded like a simple farewell dinner. Instead, they believed it resembled a much more serious discussion happening under intense pressure. And that single shift in perception changed everything. Attention quickly turned toward newly surfaced screenshots, messages, and online claims, what many users are calling receipts. At the same time, growing focus landed on Charlie's mother and how she allegedly reacted after hearing about some of the private discussions tied to that evening. According to sources close to the situation, her response was emotional, direct, and far from dismissive.
So much so that she and Charlie contacted a friend, who I believe she said was a Catholic priest, but definitely a friend, and asked him to come over and pray with them over Charlie the night before he was murdered. She eventually worked it through, and so did Charlie. That, as she later told me, will form but not prosper.
Months later, public attention surrounding Charlie's death still hasn't faded. Interviews continue circulating. New theories keep surfacing, and every new detail seems to add another layer to the timeline instead of making it clear. Meanwhile, Erika has remained highly visible throughout it all, appearing in interviews, formal events, and carefully managed public appearances. And according to online critics, that constant visibility is only bringing even more pressure onto the unanswered questions people still can't stop talking about.
Jewish donor, $2 million a year because we won't cancel Tucker. I'm thinking of inviting Candace. Somebody writes, Charlie writes, Jewish donors play into all of the stereotypes. I cannot and will not be bullied like this, leaving me no choice but to be pro-Israel.
Since Charlie's death, Erika has remained constantly in the public eye. Interviews, public appearances, emotional speeches, cameras seem to follow her everywhere. And according to growing online reactions, some people are starting to notice how nearly every major headline keeps centering around her perspective, her emotions, and her version of events. That pattern alone has started raising new questions. But one question keeps appearing more than any other.
Foremost, I just want to say he's so full of crap. The idea that Charlie had just gotten back from Korea and was like, oh, please help me, Josh Hammer. You're a complete idiot. Please help me learn how to speak to college students. Josh Hammer and a rabbi who lives in Israel. Like, there was nobody else available. You know what time it must have been in Israel for him to organize this call? Why is he doing it?
Where are Charlie's parents in all of this? The conversation has spread across social media, commentary channels, and online forums nonstop. Despite the huge media attention surrounding Charlie's death, his parents have stayed almost completely out of public view. No major interviews, no nonstop appearances, no public media campaign.
With this rabbi, was it Wojcicki, whatever his last name is, you're not going to just call like Dennis Prager, who you're apparently writing a Shabbat Shalom book with? It seems a little suspect. So you're actually clarifying for us something that's amazing. This is a stunning admission. Okay, because we know that when Charlie got off of this phone call, he texts that evening a text message to Dan Flood
And according to online discussions, that silence has only made people more curious. At the same time, Erika has rarely spoken publicly about Charlie's parents directly. Instead, she's repeatedly emphasized how important her own mother allegedly became in Charlie's life, describing her as a strong maternal figure during difficult periods. And that single detail instantly caught attention online.
Out of context screenshot of Charlie Kirk being very upset that a Jewish donor was withholding his $2 million donation. And she used this as an attempt to say, oh, Josh Hammer's lying, that Charlie remained pro-Israel until his final moment.
Because for some observers, it felt like the emotional focus of the story was slowly being redirected. Others defended Erika completely, arguing she was simply sharing personal memories and experiences. But regardless of intent, the reaction online was intense.
She's also holding aside that 2 hours after this screenshot, if you look at the timestamps, 2 hours after that, I and a few others were in a small Zoom chat, a small Zoom call with Charlie the night before he was killed, that Charlie organized. Charlie organized this Zoom call for the express purpose of trying to make sure that he had all the best answers, the best messaging advice for how to speak about Jewish-Christian relations and the Israel question on.
The more people revisited interviews and statements, the more discussions shifted toward Charlie's actual family and why they seemed so distant from the public narrative surrounding his final days. And this is where the tension reportedly started building behind the scenes. According to a source said to be close to Charlie's mother, Catherine, the family has intentionally chosen to grieve privately instead of becoming part of the nonstop media cycle. No cameras, no public statements every week, no constant attention. And honestly, many people online said they respected that decision completely. But according to that same source, what's allegedly upsetting Catherine the most isn't just the attention itself. It's the belief that Erika's description of Charlie's final days keeps changing depending on the interview. And that's the detail critics can't stop focusing on. Because according to public discussion online, people aren't talking about tiny inconsistencies anymore. They're pointing toward major differences in tone, timeline, and emotional framing. Commentary channels have started comparing interviews side by side, highlighting moments where Erika's descriptions appear noticeably different from earlier versions. Whether those changes are meaningful or simply the result of grief and emotional stress remains unclear. But once audiences start noticing contradictions in a high-profile story, every new interview suddenly gets analyzed much more closely. And then another claim surfaced that pushed the conversation even further. Sources reportedly close to the family claim Catherine believed Charlie had become emotionally overwhelmed toward the end of his life. Not just exhausted from work or public pressure, but deeply unsettled on a personal level. And according to online speculation, that's when whispers about tension inside Charlie's inner circle started growing much louder. Because one insider allegedly claimed Charlie had recently started questioning people around him. And that single allegation completely changed the tone of the conversation online. That's not the kind of claim people ignore easily. According to online discussions, the idea that Charlie may have started questioning people close to him completely changed how many observers began viewing his final days. Suddenly, earlier interviews and emotional public statements were no longer being seen the same way. And once that shift happened, scrutiny around the timeline intensified fast. But this is where the story takes another major turn. The same source reportedly claims Catherine may now be considering a public interview with Candace Owens to finally explain how Charlie was allegedly feeling during those final weeks. According to people discussing the situation online, the goal wouldn't be to create more drama. It would be to clear up what many feel has become an increasingly confusing public narrative. And if that interview actually happens, many believe it could completely reshape the conversation overnight. Because people keep circling back to the same unanswered questions. Why does the timeline seem to keep evolving? Why are there disagreements now over whether Charlie truly believed he was facing serious safety concerns before September 10th? And why do some details sound completely different depending on which interview people revisit? That growing confusion is exactly why interest around the story still hasn't faded. To many online observers, the situation now feels less like a clear timeline and more like a puzzle, where the image keeps changing every time another piece gets added. The more interviews, screenshots, and public statements people compare, the more complicated everything appears to become. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the ongoing debate surrounding Charlie's final night, because multiple versions of that evening have now circulated publicly. Different accounts, different emotional tones, different interpretations, yet nearly all of them trace back to Erika's public retelling of events in some way. That's exactly why scrutiny surrounding her interviews has continued building online. At this point, audiences aren't just reacting emotionally anymore. They're carefully comparing timelines, statements, and details side by side. And the first major version of events that shaped public opinion came during Erika's September 21st interview with the New York Times. For many people, that interview became the foundation for understanding Charlie's final days. At the time, most readers accepted the reporting without much pushback because the story sounded direct and emotionally consistent. But now, months later, people are revisiting those same details much more carefully. According to the article, the night before Charlie traveled to Utah, he and Erika reportedly attended a private dinner in the Phoenix area alongside a friend described as a faith leader. The purpose of the gathering was reportedly to pray over Charlie's upcoming college speaking tour, which was expected to include around 20 campuses. At first, that explanation sounded relatively straightforward, but several details from that dinner quickly became major talking points online. The report stated that both Erika and the faith leader appeared deeply concerned during the evening. One specific detail especially grabbed attention. Erika allegedly urged Charlie to begin wearing a bulletproof vest during future appearances. And according to public reactions online, that single statement dramatically changed how people interpreted the situation. Because once conversations about personal security enter the story, the emotional tone changes instantly. To many observers, the comment painted a picture of growing tension and serious concern surrounding Charlie's upcoming events. And then another layer got added that pushed the story even further. According to the same report, when Charlie reportedly hesitated about increasing security measures, the faith leader allegedly suggested he consider speaking from behind bulletproof glass. That recommendation immediately stood out online because it made the situation sound much more serious than ordinary caution or general safety awareness. And now, months later, those same details are being pulled back into the spotlight again as people continue questioning what was really happening behind closed doors during Charlie's final night. That was the first version of events the public heard. Clean, direct, structured. At the time, most people accepted it without questioning too much. But months later, once interviews started getting compared side by side, the story began feeling far less consistent. And according to growing online discussions, that's when scrutiny surrounding Erika's timeline really started building. Because once people revisited the earlier reporting, certain details no longer seemed to fully match. Erika's original account suggested that both she and the faith leader present at the dinner, later identified by Megyn Kelly as a Catholic priest, were deeply concerned about Charlie's safety before his upcoming speaking tour. According to that version of events, they strongly encouraged him to take extra precautions in case something dangerous happened publicly. That alone painted a very intense picture. For many people following the story, it sounded like genuine fear and serious concern were already hanging over the evening before Charlie even left for Utah. And for a while, that explanation became the accepted narrative online. But this is where things started getting more complicated. On September 23rd, Megyn Kelly reportedly introduced another layer during public discussions surrounding Charlie's final days. According to her comments, Erika was allegedly disturbed by an article published by Jezebel that referenced a so-called curse involving Charlie. And that explanation immediately sparked skepticism online, because many observers struggled to believe an online opinion article alone could realistically create that level of alarm. According to critics, Charlie had spent years dealing with harsh media coverage, controversy, and nonstop criticism. Heated headlines and public attacks weren't new territory for him. Many online commentators described him as someone already accustomed to constant backlash, and that's exactly why the explanation started raising eyebrows. If Charlie had faced years of criticism before without appearing deeply alarmed, why would this specific article suddenly create such intense concern? Why would it reportedly become the moment that triggered conversations about bulletproof vests and speaking behind protective glass? That's the detail many people online still can't fully reconcile. And according to public reactions, that's when doubts surrounding Erika's version of events really started growing louder. Commentary channels began revisiting interviews, comparing timelines, and pointing out differences in how the story was being told over time. Then came another major shift that changed the tone of the conversation again. During Erika's November 22nd live interview with Megyn Kelly, many viewers felt the emotional framing surrounding Charlie's final night suddenly sounded completely different from earlier accounts. Because this time, Erika reportedly stated that neither she nor Charlie were actually afraid at all. Instead of describing tension, fear, or serious security concerns, September 9th was now framed as a calm and ordinary evening before a routine speaking event. No panic, no urgency, no overwhelming anxiety surrounding the tour. According to this newer version, the atmosphere sounded relaxed and completely normal, and that contrast immediately caught attention online. Because when audiences placed both versions side by side, the difference felt difficult to ignore. One account described rising concern, emotional conversations, and discussions about major safety precautions. The other described a quiet and uneventful night without fear or urgency. To many online observers, those two emotional tones simply didn't sound fully aligned. And that growing inconsistency is exactly why critics continue demanding more clarity now. Not necessarily because they believe they already know what happened, but because the public narrative surrounding Charlie's final days no longer feels completely stable, depending on which interview people revisit. Every new appearance seems to introduce a slightly different emotional framing, and according to online discussions, that's exactly what continues fueling skepticism. Because once audiences begin noticing contradictions in a high-profile story like this, trust starts weakening fast. And now, months later, people are still asking the same question. Which version of that night reflects what was really happening behind closed doors? So which version are people supposed to believe? Was that night filled with urgent conversations about bulletproof vests and protective glass? Or was it simply a calm evening before another routine speaking event? That growing contradiction is exactly why online discussions keep returning to the timeline over and over again. Because according to many observers, the details no longer fit together as smoothly as they once seemed. In the earlier New York Times interview, Erika reportedly claimed she was deeply concerned about Charlie's safety on September 9th. She allegedly urged him to wear a bulletproof vest before the upcoming UVU event. And for many people following the story, that wasn't some small side comment buried in the interview. It became one of the biggest details shaping the public narrative. Because once conversations about serious security measures enter the picture, the emotional tone changes immediately. To many online critics, those statements painted a very specific image. Rising concern, growing tension, and people close to Charlie genuinely believing there could be a real safety issue surrounding the tour. And according to public discussion, that's exactly why those earlier comments continue getting revisited now. But this is where the story starts feeling harder to reconcile. Erika also reportedly claimed Charlie sensed something felt off before the event itself. In one quote that quickly spread online, she described his adrenal glands as going off, suggesting he seemed physically uneasy and emotionally restless throughout the evening. And then came another small detail that changed the entire atmosphere of the story for many listeners. Erika reportedly added, "He got up, and I could hear him eating something in the kitchen." On its own, it sounds simple. But according to online reactions, that moment painted a much different emotional picture than the calmer version of events shared later. Because suddenly, the evening no longer sounded relaxed or ordinary. Instead, many people interpreted the quote as describing someone unable to fully settle down. Someone restless, tense, and emotionally distracted before the event. And that feeling directly clashes with the later interview framing the night as peaceful, routine, and completely normal. That contrast is exactly what critics online keep focusing on. Because if Charlie was awake, uneasy, and struggling to relax, many observers argue that doesn't fully match the idea of a calm and uneventful night. But if the evening truly felt normal and low stress, then why were earlier interviews framed with such strong concern about security and safety precautions? And according to public discussion online, that gap between the two versions is where trust in the timeline really starts weakening. Not because audiences necessarily believe they already know the full truth, but because the emotional framing surrounding Charlie's final night appears noticeably different depending on which interview gets revisited. And once people begin spotting inconsistencies in a high-profile story like this, every new statement tends to face even heavier scrutiny than the one before. And that's exactly why the public conversation surrounding this timeline still hasn't faded months later. And now, according to growing online discussions, there are reports suggesting something else may have happened on September 9th that still hasn't been fully explained publicly. That possibility alone has pushed even more attention toward the timeline surrounding Charlie's final night. Because the more details that surface, the more layered the story seems to become. At first, most of the attention focused on the reported involvement of a Catholic priest during the dinner conversation. But this is where the situation started shifting again. According to comments made publicly by Candace Owens, there was also discussion involving a rabbi based in Israel who was allegedly connected to conversations happening around that same time. And once that detail entered public discussion, many online observers felt the situation suddenly sounded much bigger than a simple prayer gathering or emotional support meeting. Because now politics, influence, and public positioning all seemed to be entering the picture too. Candace further claimed Charlie allegedly sent a message suggesting he planned to distance himself from certain Israel-related political efforts. If accurate, many online commentators believe that would have been a major decision, especially considering the donor relationships, political alliances, and organizational connections often tied to high-profile activist and media circles. And that single claim immediately changed the tone of the conversation, because according to public reactions online, a decision like that could carry serious political and professional consequences. Some observers began wondering whether larger pressures may have been building behind the scenes during Charlie's final days. Then another twist got added to the timeline. After Candace spoke publicly, Turning Point-affiliated podcaster Josh Hammer reportedly responded with a clarification. According to him, the message in question was actually sent on September 9th rather than September 8th. He also claimed that after the exchange, Charlie allegedly joined a Zoom call where certain talking points and public messaging were discussed. And according to online discussions, that's the detail that really escalated public curiosity. Because suddenly the timeline included private messages, conflicting dates, religious figures, Zoom calls, and discussions tied to political positioning, all happening within the same narrow window of time. When those details get stacked together, it becomes easier to understand why so many people online continue questioning what may really have been unfolding behind closed doors that night. And so far, many feel the public still hasn't received a complete explanation connecting all those pieces together clearly. What was actually said during that call? Who was really involved? And why weren't these details explained more clearly in the earlier interviews? Those are the questions now dominating online discussions as people continue comparing every public version of the timeline side by side. Because according to many observers, the more the story gets revisited, the less straightforward it seems to become. At this point, some critics say the timeline no longer feels smooth or fully connected. Instead, they believe it sounds layered with gaps, sudden turns, and important context that still hasn't been clearly addressed. And this is where the situation reportedly took another dramatic turn. Candace Owens claimed the Zoom call allegedly involved a rabbi who was not based in the United States. But according to her public comments, the conversation itself reportedly became far more intense than people originally assumed. She suggested the discussion may not have been calm or supportive at all. Instead, it allegedly involved pressure, disagreements, and attempts to influence Charlie's position on certain issues. And that claim immediately changed the tone of the conversation online. Because according to public discussion, if accurate, that would make the reported meeting sound much more serious than a simple spiritual check-in or private conversation among friends. Candace also alleged that incentives may have been brought up during the discussion in ways that some listeners interpreted as an effort to sway Charlie's thinking. And that's the detail that fueled even more speculation. Because once claims involving pressure, influence, and political positioning entered the timeline, many people online started reevaluating earlier explanations surrounding Charlie's final days. Suddenly, the concern described in earlier interviews no longer sounded connected only to media criticism or online backlash. To some observers, the situation started feeling much more personal and immediate behind the scenes. And now the questions surrounding Erika are getting even louder. Critics online continue asking why she reportedly hasn't provided a clearer explanation about the Zoom call itself or addressed the alleged messages where Charlie supposedly expressed serious concern about his safety. Instead, according to online commentary, many feel the public has only received fragmented explanations, shifting timelines, and partial details that still don't fully connect together. And that lingering uncertainty is exactly why the story continues gaining attention months later. And every time a new detail surfaces, the situation seems to grow even more complicated instead of becoming clearer. That's exactly why pressure surrounding this story keeps building online. People aren't losing interest, they're demanding answers. Because according to public discussion, every new interview, resurfaced message, or timeline update only seems to create even more confusion instead of closing the gaps. And now attention is shifting toward Charlie's parents more than ever before. Strong rumors continue circulating that Candace Owens may eventually invite Charlie's mother onto her podcast so she can publicly share her side of the story for the very first time. And according to many online observers, if that interview actually happens, it could completely reshape the conversation overnight. Because at this point, audiences aren't simply looking for emotional reactions or dramatic headlines anymore. They want clarity. They want one timeline that feels complete and consistent, not multiple versions that sound different depending on the interview. not shifting emotional framing every few weeks, and not lingering questions that continue growing every time another public statement gets revisited. That's the part keeping this story alive. According to online reactions, many people feel the public narrative surrounding Charlie's final days still doesn't fully connect together. Certain details continue sounding incomplete. Key moments remain heavily debated, and every new explanation seems to spark another round of scrutiny instead of resolving the confusion. And this is where things could shift again in a major way. Because if Charlie's mother eventually decides to speak publicly herself, many believe it could become one of the biggest turning points in the entire story. A direct statement from someone so close to Charlie would likely bring massive attention and instantly reignite debates surrounding the timeline, the reported meetings, and the conflicting accounts already circulating online. Until then, people will likely keep comparing interviews, revisiting older statements, and analyzing every new detail that surfaces. Because once audiences begin noticing inconsistencies in a high-profile story, trust becomes much harder to maintain. And according to many online commentators, that's exactly where things stand right now. A timeline still under heavy scrutiny, a growing list of unanswered questions, and a public conversation that doesn't appear to be slowing down anytime soon. What do you think is really happening here? Let me know your thoughts below, and if you've been following this story closely, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for future updates.